It's been almost 20 years since the Dreamcast launch, and it's kind of wild to think about how unique that console was. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 things only Dreamcast owners will remember. Coming in at number 10, it's Blemcast. Hey, you know how the Dreamcast was a pretty awesome console on its own, but the PlayStation also has a library of games? Well, Blem, a company that was around at the time, wanted to use the fact that there were other games on other consoles to play more games on Dreamcast, with higher resolution graphics. Now, the way they ended up doing that was through releasing what they called Blem packs. They were CDs that you put into the Dreamcast and it would then play the game from the PlayStation on the Dreamcast with hardware-accelerated graphics at twice the resolution. You could play Gran Turismo 2, Metal Gear Solid, and Tekken 3, and since then, a prototype version of the software actually leaked, showing that they were capable of running a lot more, but they were also caught up in the large legal budget of Sony, who wasn't actually able to legally block Blem. However, Blem did not have the legal budget to keep up with them and eventually went under. This was easily my favorite way to play Metal Gear Solid back in the day, because the GameCube remake had much worse music and in some cases very strange voice acting choices. But without that resolution boost, that original PlayStation version looks real bad. Number 9 is the VMU, the Visual Memory Unit, a memory card with a screen on it that when you placed it inside of the controller would display things on the controller, sometimes just an image and with some games even small amounts of data pertaining to the game. And in the case of a lot of games, you could actually download its own games to the unit. And when you would take the VMU out of the controller, it would be its own little gaming console. Now granted, it was extremely limited, but it did have a D-pad, an A button, and a B button, and in theory, you probably could have put a lot of different games on it. It's actually one of probably the most underutilized parts of the Dreamcast, and we'll probably never see anything else exactly like it. Number 8, the Dreamcast Intro. When you turned that console on, you were greeted with the most calming, nice, and welcoming intro I can remember for a game console. It used these soothing string sounds and water droplet sounds with the Dreamcast logo, which in different territories had different colors. In North America it was red, for instance, whereas in others it was blue. And it kind of acted as though it was saying, "You are entering the dream space. We shall cast the dreams unto your brain, using only this TV screen." Actually, I'm not 100% sure that was the intended message, but it was certainly soothing, calming, and welcoming, which is funny because you'd boot it up and play like Resident Evil Code Veronica, where you're in danger all the time. More like Nightmare Cast. Number 7 is Shenmue. And it's hard for me to overstate exactly how important Shenmue is to video games. It is, in every way at least, one of the primary ancestors to today's open world games. And a direct ancestor to Yakuza, which in every way could be described similarly as Shenmue. However, Shenmue follows a much more low-key story through much less interesting locations, despite the fact they are quite detailed locations. And yes, there is a Sega arcade that features numerous old Sega games in it. And it's almost cool to look back at this game because it's so much more rudimentary and based in the ideas of actually having to deal with the passage of time in a realistic fashion, at least as far as the game can. But in some ways, it's also like, wow, there are reasons why some elements of a game are unrealistic, because this is not great. I'm really looking forward to when the new Shenmue comes out and completes the trilogy. I just want to see what exactly they did, because the formula, I promise, cannot be exactly the same as this game. It was such an experimental and forward-thinking game that there were a lot of missteps. Still, it's just unique in gaming history, and I love it. Coming in at number 6, those Sega Dreamcast kiosks that you would walk into your favorite store that sold video games and it would be there for you to play. Now, in Walmart you can play, let's say, Nintendo Switch or Sony PlayStation 4 on a fairly large TV nowadays. But this thing was in every way very much like a small miniaturized arcade cabinet. The TV was not a high-resolution TV, it was a low-resolution TV, and it was not a big one. It had 2 Dreamcast controllers, and the intent was to normalize the damn thing because it really didn't get a lot of marketing, at least compared to how much it should have gotten for it to be some kind of a success. Still, anybody who really spent time with the Dreamcast probably will remember saying, hey, can we go to the store? I want to check out the Dreamcast. Number 5, let's talk about all of the massive classics that were only on this platform. In my opinion, you can start nowhere other than Crazy Taxi for that discussion. Crazy Taxi is just this absurdist arcade game where you're driving like a maniac around a town on a tiny little timer to try to pick up people to just refill your timer to pick up more. I mean, it's wild. It's available on PC now, I think, and it is such a fun game, you should try it. Then there's Jet Set Radio, which again also got a re-release a long time later. It's a graffiti game with this experimental atmosphere that just created some of the most fun gaming experiences I've ever had. And then I'd mentioned it prior, but Resident Evil Code Veronica, which is the actual proper sequel to Resident Evil 2, which added so much to the series in the way of real-time backgrounds and significantly more detailed characters, that was called by quite a few to be the best Resident Evil at the time. And if you're a fan of JRPGs, who could forget Skies of Arcadia, which is a colorful and really enjoyable, if a bit standard, and yet extremely memorable JRPG that I enjoyed the hell out of at the time. Coming in at number 4, all those goofy accessories. Like, Dreamcast was one of the kings of weird accessories long before Nintendo even tried to make a run at that with the Wii. I mean, there was your standard stuff for the time, your rumble packs, your various adapters, but there was also other things, like a microphone that was only usable with one game, in any actual capacity at least, or the Cha-Cha Amigo controller, which was actually maracas. It was for a rhythm game, if you don't remember Samba de Amigo. There was the fishing controller. Who could forget the fishing controller? Why, I bet anybody who didn't play a fishing game on Dreamcast, which is a lot of people. And, you know, like, several actually really just good light gun controllers. There are a number of really good light gun games on Dreamcast, and the official light gun for Dreamcast was just really good. At number 3, remembering that it was basically the first console to really truly embrace online. Phantasy Star Online specifically was the title that we saw this with, and we are seeing a new iteration of this series, or at least new to the West when it hits next year, but going way back to the original, Phantasy Star Online was the absolute first online RPG for video game consoles. It had real-time combat, so it was technically an action RPG, and mostly you have to organize a team and just go through a preconceived story. But still, the type of game that we look at for MMORPGs now just wasn't even vaguely conceived of at the time, and it was competing more with titles like Ultima Online and Diablo rather than the World of Warcraft type games we see today. It was a technological achievement as well as pretty damn fun. Coming in at number 2, all of the arguments of people who really loved Sega and were really kind of just overall bothered by the fact that Sony ate Sega so badly in the previous generation. I mean, the PlayStation really thoroughly destroyed the Sega Saturn, and I was among the people counted in these ranks. Oh boy, was I ready for Sega to take on Sony. Sega, the makers of the best consoles, finally coming back hard. I remember so many people who were just like, Sega's got Sony this time. Haha. That turned out not to be true. I mean, we got some really great games though, and that's a good way to look at it personally, I think. And coming in at number 1, the North American launch date, 9/9 of 99. Now, given the fact that the 9 is probably the number that looks most like the Dreamcast swirly, I have to imagine that's probably at least kind of why they did this, but really they probably just did it because it seemed like a momentous occasion. And it had a hell of a lineup at launch, too. The games I mentioned earlier were specifically not launch titles, because the launch titles included Soul Calibur, which is like not the most innovative of any fighting game ever, but man oh man was it fun. But if you were looking for a fighting game that was more innovative, then Power Stone was right there for you, and I was so hooked on Power Stone. It was such a fun game. I mentioned that there were some good light gun shooters on the console. One of them was at launch. House of the Dead 2 was just one hell of a game. They don't make stuff like that anymore. and that's something I really miss. The whole Enter the Gungeon arcade game they came up with recently is the closest thing in a while, and I was really happy to see that, but man, House of the Dead 2. We had that Ready to Rumble boxing game, which was just fun as hell. Oh, and Mortal Kombat Gold and Sonic Adventure. Just like this monster launch lineup that was so frickin' fun. You could easily go broke day one. If only the entire console's lifespan was the same as day one. Which leads us to our bonus point, a thing that we all remember as Dreamcast fans that other people won't, is just how short the lifespan of the console was. I mean, we had such monster, innovative titles that were just progressing the idea of gaming as quickly as it could. Seriously amazing games, and poof, it was all gone one day. And then Sonic showed up on GameCube, and it was like, wow, the world is different. What did you remember from the Dreamcast days? Leave us a comment and let us know what you think. If you like this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click the subscribe button and the notification bell. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.